Good morning, everyone. My name is Emil, and I work at CANHR. Welcome to the CANHR Town Hall on residents' rights, voting, visitation, and more. We have some basic rules. Please remain muted until it's time for questions. We'll have 3 short presentations, and there'll be a time for questions after each one. If you have questions throughout, please send them via chat. And
If you know how to do chat. If not, can we raise hands, or will that even work with 200 people?
You can use the raise hand feature on Zoom, but we probably won't see you if you just raise your hand.
Okay.
So. All right, well, I'll turn it over to our Executive Director, Patricia McGinnis.
Thank you, Emil. My name is Pat McGinnis, and I'm the Executive Director of California Advocates for Nursing Home Reform. And I thank all of you for taking the time to join us this morning. We've gotten so many questions about visitation, about voting rights during the pandemic, about how to file a complaint, and particularly filing an effective complaint, giving the status right now of Department of Public Health and Department of Social Services, that we decided to do a town hall. We're going to talk about the rights to visit and exit facilities, and that's not just nursing homes, but residential care, assisted living, and continuing care retirement communities. We're going to talk about voting rights during the pandemic, which is absolutely essential right now because so many assisted living and nursing home residents do not get an opportunity to be able to go to the ballot box and how they can file their ballots via mail. And we're also going to be talking about how to file effective complaints and where to file them. Tony Chicotel is one of our staff attorneys, and Tony's going to talk about rights to visit. Julie Pollock is our program manager. She's going to talk about voting rights during the pandemic. And Mike Dark is another staff attorney who's going to be talking about filing effective complaints. So after their presentation, we'll take some time to ask some questions. We had some that were pre-submitted that we'll try to cover if it's not covered during the presentation. So Tony, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Pat. Can we get the slides up, please? All right. Good morning, everybody. As Pat said, thanks for joining us. Happy Resident Rights Month for nursing home residents. I guess assisted living residents don't have a Resident Rights Month. I say that at a time when resident rights have never been more depleted and less protected. So this is a critical moment for resident rights. Thought it'd be a good idea to talk about where we are on some real important ones, especially during COVID-19. I'm going to talk about resident rights, but before I do that, I want to just briefly mention a few things about CANHR. So can you go to the next slide, Pauline? So just a couple things. I mean, we've been around since 1983 advocating to improve the quality of life, the quality of care for people in long-term care facilities. We have, obviously, our website is canhr.org, and then off of our website, we've built a COVID-19 particular website. There's a screenshot of that site a couple of days ago. We're sort of overwhelmed right now with 2 primary issues, which is our visitation and voting. That's been the focus of a lot of our staff for the last month or so, on visitation actually since March. But a lot of concerns about voting rights have come up in the last month or so. Julie will talk about that. And as Pat mentioned, there's a lot of ways to get in touch with us. Even if we're not able to get to your question today, feel free to give us a call or use our feedback form, which is off of our webpage. On the main page of our site, there's a button that says Contact Us. You click on that and you can engage with us through what's called a feedback form. We get that in the form of an email. And then one of our advocates will get back to you usually within a day or two of your question. Okay, next slide. All right, this is from our visitationsaveslives.com website, which you can reach through the COVID webpage that we have. Visitationsaveslives.com. We have a fact sheet. On one side is nursing home rules related to visitation, and the other side is RCFEs, residential care facilities for the elderly. This is our best attempt to break down in a not too confusing way what the rules are as of right now. And this was just updated about a week ago or so to reflect some new CMS at the federal level and new state guidance as well. So you can get this fact sheet off of our website. I'm not going to talk about the details too much, but what I want to impress upon you is that, I mean, at least on paper, nursing homes and assisted living facilities are really supposed to be bending over backwards to keep residents connected to their family and friends. They should be putting in maximum effort on this. There's kind of good news and bad news on visitation. The good news is we really had, back in April, May, we just had the virtual visitation column and the compassionate care visitor column, and they were more limited. We didn't have outdoor visitation. We didn't have indoor visitation. The professionals were barred for the most part. It was a complete ban on visitation, both in assisted living facilities and nursing homes. The good news is there's been a lot of progress, there, at least on paper. And the calls we were getting, which was, when do I get to see my loved one, have sort of turned into, I can only see my loved one once a week or once a month. So I guess that's progress, and I'm glad of that. The bad news is there's been a significant lack of compliance with all of these requirements and a significant lack of enforcement when facilities are non-compliant. Can we go to the next slide, Pauline? I wanted to let everyone know that you can look up through the State Department of Public Health website which facilities have been cleared for a mandated, I repeat that, mandated indoor visitation. When this list first came out about a month and a half, 2 months ago, I think there were about 34 facilities listed on here. Now it's well beyond 700. So a lot of facilities in the last month or two are now in that category. They meet the criteria for mandated indoor visitation. And you can get that off the state website. It's updated, I believe, once a week. Okay, next slide, please, Pauline. Here's the assisted living side of the visitation fact sheet. And for the most part, it's the same. I mean, you get the same kind of mandates, a little less specificity, a little less nuance. And I think the reason for that is because in nursing homes, we have two forms of guidance. We have guidance from the federal government, CMS, and guidance from the Department of Public Health, the state. Whereas in RCFEs, there is no federal guidance, just we have the state guidance. But you still have the same mandates for indoor visitation, the same mandates for outdoor visitation, pretty much. Okay, next slide, Pauline. Okay, so a lot of you in advance of the town hall asked questions about enforcing the visitation mandates. Okay, yeah, we've seen the PIN for RCFEs, we've seen the AFLs for nursing homes. It's pretty clear they've got to give us outdoor visitation, and in a lot of cases give us indoor visitation, and they're not doing it. So what do we do? All right, here we go. I think you want to attack this from three angles. One is with the facility, two is with the state regulatory agencies, and three is with the local public health authority. So engaging with the facility, I think, is obviously important. They're the ones who are setting this policy for the most part. Lock them into their position in writing. Write to them. Don't call them. Write to them. Either use emails or letters and get them to state what exactly their policy is as it relates to visitation. And if they're not complying with the state or the federal requirements, make them explain why, where they're getting the authority to not do that. And I know some facilities won't engage with you back. So that's when you, in your letter, you start making assumptions. If I don't hear back from you, I'm going to assume you have no reason, and I'm going to operate accordingly. The second thing you want to do is bring in the state, the Department of Public Health, Department of Social Services. Fortunately, I mean, they've issued these policies that have mandates in them. They're for the most part very supportive of the idea. They get how important visitation is for residents and their families, and they've gone to bat for complainants on getting facilities to alter their policies to allow visitation that's at least sort of consistent with what the state requirements are. So really push them. Start with a complaint at the local level. If you're not getting good results in a short period of time, move your problem up the management level to the district office, regional office for RCFEs. And then if you're not getting satisfaction there, take it to the state. Both Department of Social Services and Department of Public Health are based in Sacramento, and their program managers are fairly responsive on visitation concerns. And they have been helpful, at least in the cases I've been involved in getting the facility to update their policies and with more liberal visitation. The third part is the Public Health Authority. And if you saw on our fact sheet on the first page with nursing homes, there was an asterisk. It's an important asterisk. It says subject to local public health authority guidance that's more conservative. So our state laws allow local public health authorities to basically override or to supersede what the state has issued related to anything infection control related. So local public health authorities have these terrible orders prohibiting visitation and commingling of people in long-term care facilities that date back to March. And I got to just sort of tell you how upset and frustrated I've been with local public health authorities. A lot of them have been completely overwhelmed by this, that they don't know nursing homes or assisted living facilities at all. They don't know the needs of that population at all. And all they're thinking about are in terms of infection rates. And I think they've been subject to a lot of ageism and paternalism when it comes to long-term care residents. They're not concerned about quality of life for these folks. They're just concerned about rates of infection. And I've had a very difficult time getting in touch with the right people to even have them reconsider what their policies are. So I think you have to go at them pretty angry and be prepared to deal with agencies that are not that customer service oriented. But I think it's really important to engage them. The more people they hear from, the more likely it is they are going to be responsive and bring their policies into alignment with what the federal and state governments have required. Okay, next slide. So coming and going is another big issue related to the pandemic. We don't have the same kind of clarity in the guidance as it relates to the ability to come and go. Facilities still have a lot of discretion for how they handle residents who leave the facility for any period of time or for any reason. We've been saying this since April. I think a real key is to get the facility's policy as it relates to coming and going. People are not prisoners. We hear that all the time, but the facility does have discretion at this time to require residents to do certain things when they get back. And I got to tell you, we had a nursing home case where a resident went out for a walk and the facility didn't want him to go out for a walk. And when he came back, he was locked out and they wouldn't let him back in. And the police actually, they were called out and they sided with the facility. So residents are really out on a limb if they go out of the facility without understanding what the facility's policies are and without some sort of assurances that they're going to be allowed back in. Now, this resident did get back in. They were subjected to a 14-day quarantine, but just keep that in mind. What we're really looking for here is a balance between safety and autonomy. People should be able to come and go from a facility. They shouldn't be locked in, but they have to, of course, engage with common sense, important safety provisions that the facility is comfortable with in order to come back in and, for the protection of the other residents there. So we strongly advise people to try to work this out in advance. And if the facility is saying you can't leave under any circumstances, that's a situation where you want to get licensing involved or maybe call CANHR. And just sort of a gripe about this is we've asked a lot more of the residents in this situation than of staff. Staff, as we know, are coming and going, and when they're off for the day, who knows what they're up to, but we don't give the residents that same kind of trust when they go out of the building, which I think is a shame, but sort of consistent with the comfort level that facilities have with disregarding resident rights, and the reason why we think it's so important to talk about resident rights today. So that's it for me. I know visitation has some overlap with voting rights, and Julie's going to get into that. It's really important to have visitors be able to come and go if they're going to assist some residents with their voting rights. But with that, I'll take a couple of questions. I think we have a few minutes for a couple questions related to what I talked about.
I have a question first that we need to really discuss, and that's the right for independent CCRC residents to come and go from the facility if they meet all the exceptions in the DSS guidelines. What's going on right now is that CCRCs are imposing their own ruling restrictions, And it's not legal, number one. You're an independent visitor, independent living. And secondly, we still have facilities where none of the exceptions in the DSS guidelines apply. What do CCRC residents do?
Yeah, CCRC residents in independent living units have rights that go beyond what RCFE and nursing home residents have, because we don't have the same level of concern related to the introduction of the virus. And there's also typically a lot more isolation of those residents. They have their own units that they live in. They don't share rooms typically, they're basically living like in apartments. So the residents of independent living units in CCRC should be pretty much unencumbered by rules as it relates to coming and going and visitors and those kinds of things. Now, I think that they're going to have to practice good, sensible infection control and not be too brazen about where they're going and what they're doing. But I mean, they're independent living residents. They should be able to operate as independent as possible. And
when the facility won't abide by the DSS guidelines, should they just contact DSS or their local office, or what do you suggest?
Yeah. Of course, you want to go to the regulatory agencies, but on that situation, I'm really wondering about what the facility can do about it. I mean, are they going to lock the resident out when they go on an outing? I guess it's plausible. They may try to impose some sort of 14-day quarantine upon return, but what if the resident disregards that? What's the facility going to do? Call the police? What do they do? I just don't think. I think on this, of course, every case is going to be a little bit different, and you'd have to think it through. But I think the resident have more power than, in some cases, than maybe they think they have. Because
Pauline,
the facility,
can you just take off, go back to the view?
I don't think they can force a lot of this.
Okay. You want me to stop sharing?
Yeah, stop sharing so that we can see people. And one of the questions is, are the ombudsman women helping advocate for SNF RCFE residents who want to go out and told they can't, or residents who want visitors and can't receive that?
Yeah, I imagine the ombudsman have been very involved in asserting people's visitation rights and working with facilities to make them comply with what the state requirements are. Maybe one of the ombudsmen can speak to their efforts as a group, but I mean, based on the level of calls and emails we're getting on visitation, I'm sure they're getting a lot too. They're certainly not shying away from it.
Somebody has their hand up. Nick, you had a question? Oh, no. Any other questions about this? We do have, well, most of them have been answered regarding, but one is in-person. If CMS guidance says in-person visitation is required, can the facility fulfill the requirement by offering window visits only?
Yeah, that was a good question, and I think the answer is no. I do think that window visits count as an in-person visit as opposed to a virtual visit, but the state and CMS requirements permit or mandate outdoor visits. And outdoor visits to me are different from window visits. I've heard awful stories about window visits where the windows are tinted and you really can't see through them, or you can't hear one another through them. And I just think that the mandates are for more than that. In-person visit under the mandates include outdoor visits at a minimum. And that would be me and you with nothing in between us except distance.
Well, in the a response about the ombudsman, it says in Sonoma County, the ombudsman stated the county public health rules prevail, no advocacy.
Well, my suspicion is that the ombudsman office there is working with the local public health authority to get them to update their policies. And like I said, these local public health authorities have been very, very disappointing. Even from a public health perspective, visitation is vital to the health of these residents. And I don't think they've taken that into account at the local level. And that's shocking to me. I've been very disappointed. I mean, we've got 8 million people in this country who've had COVID-19. And I just wonder about the efficiency and the effectiveness of our public health authorities.
And just as a final, for those of you who wondered about the link to the list of facilities approved for indoor visitation, that's on your chat. Click on the chat link and you'll see that link as well. In Orange County, we do advocate for outings or visitation. That was the ombudsman in Orange County. And another question, are all local ombudspersons paid positions?
No. I mean, most of the ombudsmen that actually provide services are volunteers, but a lot of the work that's done is by paid staff. So there's usually a core of paid staff, depending on the size of the county, from 1 or 2 people to up to maybe 10 or 15 people. But then each county hopefully has
You're
a large
freezing out, Tony.
number of volunteers that do most of the day-to-day visits in facilities and managing.
Something's wrong with your computer, Tony. You kept freezing out. We'll come back.
Sorry about that.
Julie's going to talk about voting rights during the pandemic, which is particularly important right now. Julie Pollock is our program manager at CANHR. Go ahead, Julie.
Okay. Pauline, do you want to share the slides again? Thank you. So good morning, everyone. I'm going to talk about voting rights in care facilities. And so we have an election coming up, if you haven't heard about it yet. And so, you know, to build off what Tony was saying, with all of the additional barriers and challenges brought because of the pandemic, there's a growing concern that people in care facilities who do want to vote will face extraordinary challenges when doing so. So next slide, Pauline. And so when we talk about what's at stake, you know, since the pandemic began, it's people in nursing homes and assisted living facilities that have really faced the devastating, you know, consequences to our public health response to COVID. And so with this upcoming election, you know, where our COVID response in long-term care is certainly at issue, it's so important that the people that actually live in these facilities have a say, and can be part of the public conversation about policies that affect their health and their well-being. You know, and it's not an insignificant number of people we're talking about. It's potentially hundreds of thousands of voters in care facilities throughout California. Next slide. Okay, so I'm going to start with some general advice for people in long-term care wanting to vote. First thing, register to vote. So just because you move into a nursing home or assisted living facility doesn't mean you lose the right to vote. But if you move permanently, you should register at your current address, which is going to be the facility address. And the deadline to register in California is October 19th. So that's Monday. It's coming up. We do have same-day voter registration in California, but that process requires an in-person, it requires voters to show up in person, so it's a lot less practically feasible. So the October 19th deadline is really important, and you can register online or by calling the Secretary of State hotline number and asking for a paper registration that needs to be postmarked by the 19th. 2, vote by mail. So everyone in California this year gets a vote by mail ballot. It's probably the most practical option for a lot of nursing home residents and assisted living residents. However, a lot of residents will likely require assistance in reading, completing, or casting their ballot. And so nursing homes and assisted living facilities are required to support residents in their exercise of their right to vote and should have staff available to assist. In addition to having staff available, under the Voting Rights Act, voters with disabilities are entitled to assistance by a person of their choice. And so that really goes back to the visitation issue, because the need for assistance with voting is just one more reason that a resident can demand visitation from a family member or friend or person of their choosing. They are entitled to a visit for the purpose of voting assistance with a person of their choice. And so as we talked about a lot, it's really, it's really going to come down to sort of enforcement of that right and holding the facility accountable to allow visitation. And then the third thing, for those who do want to vote in person, there are going to be some obvious challenges, particularly with facilities placing restriction on residents coming and going. So definitely have those conversations well in advance to understand what the facility policies are with regard to coming and going. Okay, next slide. So a lot of state and federal agencies have recently put out guidance related to facilities' responsibility for ensuring that residents can vote. The CMS, the federal agency charged with oversight of nursing homes, put out a memo on October 5th. And one important thing to note about the CMS memo is their language is very protective of resident rights. They include the statement, facilities should provide residents with assistance completing a ballot with an agent of the resident's choosing, including family representative, long-term care ombudsman, or nursing home staff. So the language in the CMS memo mirrors the Federal Voting Rights Act and reiterates that residents have the right to see a family member or person of their choosing for voting assistance. Okay, we can move on to the next slide, Pauline. And then I'm just going to quickly, there's also, in addition to the federal guidance about nursing home voting rights, the California Department of Public Health also issued guidance, again, reiterating a lot of the same facility obligations to help residents register, complete, cast, and track their ballot. And next slide, Pauline. The guidance that applies to facility obligations to assist with voting is not restricted to nursing homes. It also applies to residential care facilities for the elderly, so assisted living and board and care facilities. Again, the language in this public provider information notice is somewhat similar to the Department of Public Health guidance. Facilities have a lot of obligations to make sure they have a plan to ensure residents have the right to vote. And it also notes that staff may not violate a resident's privacy by telling people how they vote or determine that a resident is mentally incompetent to vote. And so that's an important point, and it brings me to the next slide, Pauline. Which is, a common issue that may come up in a lot of care facilities is related to voting for people with cognitive impairment. And so you don't lose the right to vote just because you have a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease or dementia or other impairment. In California, you don't lose the right to vote unless a judge, a court, determines that you're not competent to do so and specifically revokes your right to vote. So this is true for people who have dementia diagnoses. It's even true for people who are under conservatorship. So for folks that have a conservator who is a legal surrogate decision maker in charge of healthcare and financial decisions, they are still presumptively eligible to vote. You're not stripped, the mere fact of being in a conservatorship does not strip someone of the right to vote. And so, we need to make sure that staff in care facilities have an understanding of these voter rights. And, staff should not be deciding who should and should not vote, and have no authority to make judgments about, which residents should and should not be voting based on their opinion about that person's ability. So again, every adult is presumed competent to be able to vote in California. And, that being said, I think voters who do have some degree of cognitive impairment may require assistance in voting or completing the ballot. And I recognize that's not, necessarily a simple task. There's a lot of nuance in being able to properly assist someone with cognitive impairment to be able to vote and to ensure that their wishes are reflected on the ballot and not influenced by the person who's providing the assistance. And so I posted here some resources on best practices when assisting people with cognitive impairment with voting. All right, we can go to the last slide. Okay, and then so just to leave with some practical tips, for residents, once you've figured out your voting plan, whether that be needing assistance filling out the ballot, planning to have a family member come in and help you fill out the ballot to drop it off, or if you want to go to the polls in person, make sure you communicate your voting plan, talk with the facility administrator or social services director well in advance. The long-term care ombudsmen, are there to be resident advocates. They're a great resource during this process and can provide additional assistance with actually completing the ballot. And then finally, if the facility if they're failing to support your voting plan, if they are refusing to allow you to have a visitor come help you, or they don't have staff available to help you complete your ballot, you should file a complaint as soon as possible with the appropriate oversight agency. And I think that's actually a good segue into the next portion of this, because Mike Dark is going to talk about how to file a complaint.
We have a couple of questions, Julie, and what happened to them? Oh, here they are. 3 Santa Rosa facilities were evacuated 2 weeks ago in the glass fire, and not all have returned while facilities mitigate smoke damage. Any idea how to track their ballots? They are dispersed all over the Bay Area, and not all of the facilities they are with may recognize the issue.
My goodness.
This is Jody, and I actually responded to that question. All Californians can track their ballot online by registering at the Secretary of State Ballot Tracks website, and I included a link for that in the chat room.
Okay. Can independent residents be quarantined if they have not tested positive, shown symptoms, or confirmed to have been exposed? Well, I thought we addressed that before. No.
Yeah, again, what method does the facility have to enforce this quarantine? Are they going to be able to evict you because you didn't comply with the quarantine? If your refusal to comply was reasonable, I don't see how they could possibly punish you for that. But I'd have to know more about the individual circumstances of that case.
And we want to look at whether they or not the facility meets the guidelines under the DSS PIN, the Provider Information Notice. And if they do meet the guidelines, then people should not be quarantined. They shouldn't be required to be tested or anything else. Let me just ask a couple of other questions right now, real quick. In terms of shots, my husband is a resident of a California board and care. I'd like to know what state planning or advocacy is going on for board and care residents to receive flu shots, and when available, the vaccine shots. I don't know of any planning at this point, but I imagine DSS would be having something in process.
Yeah, well, DSS did issue a pretty comprehensive PIN. That's a provider information notice on flu shots and influenza prevention in assisted living facilities. So the nursing homes are strongly encouraged to get as many residents as possible inoculated from influenza. Of course, you can't require residents to receive it. I mean, you got to get informed consent before you can give somebody an injection. Mm-hmm. That may be an issue in some facilities. I also suspect that, a lot of times it was family members who were taking residents to get their flu shots, and they might not be able to do that this year. So I would hope that each facility, even the small 6-bed board and care facilities, have some sort of plan to get residents flu shots that want them on site or, maybe outdoors out of the building.
Do independent or all residents have the right to be informed immediately of the incidence of a positive case in the building, whether it's staff or residents?
So this is Mike. So the quick answer is yes, they have the right to be informed of a positive test by a resident or a healthcare worker, but normal health privacy protections still apply. So you don't get to know their name, you don't get to know what room that they are in. But yes, you do have a right to know that there is COVID in the building.
And one more thing, Mike, before you start yours. Does the facility have the right to force residents to display private information in the lobby?
Absolutely not.
No. Okay. And doesn't the facility have to test all residents after a positive case occurs? Our facility refused to test after another positive resident case was announced on October 6th. How can residents make sure that CADSS guidelines are followed?
So the answer is yes. All facilities in California should have COVID mitigation plans that are in place actually whether or not there is a COVID test. It's just that the response is a little different if there is a COVID test. So they should be testing everyone. If everyone's negative, healthcare workers and residents included, there's a much more sort of relaxed testing regime. If, however, a single person tests positive, that could be a worker or a resident, then there is much stricter and much more frequent testing that must take place. And the California Department of Public Health is asking for regular reports from those facilities to ensure that that's happening. If you have some doubt that that is happening, I would go to two places, both the California Department of Public Health, but also your county public health authority, which tracks those kinds of cases very closely.
And what about residential care assisted living? Same thing?
Same thing, except DSS and County Department of Public Health.
Okay, Mike Dark, one of our wonderful staff attorneys, is going to talk about filing effective complaints, because obviously if you can't get what you want from the facility, this is going to be your answer. Mike, take it away.
All right, thanks, Pat. So let's start just with that cover slide, Pauline. And there we go, just stay there for a second. So I'm gonna roll through these pretty quickly, just so that we can reserve some time for questions at the end. But you will find all of this information and more at the CANHR website, CANHR.org. If you just Google filing a complaint against a skilled nursing facility, CANHR, or filing a complaint against a residential care for the elderly or assisted living facility, CANHR, you will find our pages with lots of this information already on it. So you don't have to feel like you have to take notes while I talk real fast. But let me back up slightly. So you heard from Tony and from Julie, two of the big problems that we're facing right now in California, voting and visitation. But of course, there's like a smorgasbord of other issues that residents in long-term care have always had to deal with. Illegal admission agreements, illegal discharges, cold food, no food, over medication, under medication, you name it. And I wish in a perfect world that the way problems like that could routinely be resolved is by going to the administrator, going to the director of nursing, and saying, you know, I've got this problem, can't we work it out? Fact of the matter is, a lot of times you can't work it out, and one of the reasons is financial. And that is because most care, most things that a facility needs to deliver cost them time or cost them money. And so saying no is a lot more appealing to them than saying yes in a lot of these circumstances. Now, there are a lot of other resources you can go to. Before you go to an agency, you can try working with an ombudsperson. They can be very effective advocates. We've talked a little bit about them already. You can also use family councils, which exist in not every facility, but where they do exist, they can give you leverage in trying to get your voice heard in a way that is more effective than just a single person talking. So you can also find info on family councils on our website. So let's go to the next slide. Pauline, thank you. So when do you file a complaint? Well, so I think it's worth taking a shot, talking to the facility, as Tony says, documenting your conversations with the facility rather than just having, you know, conversations in the hallway or the phone, and trying to work with an ombudsman, say, where you can. There's some things, though, which I would just go straight to the regulators for. If something really affects health and safety. If someone could get sick or could die, I don't see that as an issue that you negotiate over with a facility. I think that is something that you go to the regulators for. And this is an important point. This system of filing a complaint with the regulators, and we'll talk about who they are for the different kinds of facilities, is built into the way California oversees long-term care. So it's not, filing a complaint is not going nuclear. It's not like taking your landlord to court. This is part of the process. It's integral to ensuring that residents get the rights that they're guaranteed under California law. So don't feel like you're like sticking your head way out on a limb just because you want to file a complaint. You see a list of some of the things that people can file complaints on. You see COVID-related stuff here, information about COVID. You see Tony's visitation issues. Voting should be on there too. Julie just mentioned it. There are a couple circumstances in which I might hold back on a complaint. For example, if I'm negotiating with a facility about something, whether it's visitation or say a lack of communication or a resident rights violation, I might say, don't make me go to the regulator. Here's what I would say to them. Let's work this out so that I don't have to pursue that administrative remedy. And sometimes the threat of that with some facilities can get you part or most of the way to where you want to go. But if none of that works, you're going to file a complaint. So let's talk a little bit more about how you do that. Let's go to the next slide. So first, a super common misconception is that the only person who can file a complaint is a resident, or even worse, someone with POA, power of attorney for a resident. None of that is true. In fact, almost anybody can file a complaint. This could be a friend of a resident. It could be an ombudsperson. Frequently, good ombuds people do file complaints. Family members. The main thing, though, is that it's got to be someone with enough knowledge about what happened to actually put some flesh on the bones of the complaint so that the investigator winds up knowing what's really going on and what the problem is that they're supposed to be looking into. Let's go to the next slide. That's anyone making a complaint. We'll go to the next slide. Okay, who loves your baby? So this is really about looking to see who your protector is. If you are in a nursing home, nursing homes are licensed by the California Department of Public Health. That means they have the power to license or not license nursing homes. If they do something wrong, they can punish them. Same with assisted living facilities, also called RCFEs, residential care for the elderly, in California. They're the licensing facilities, Department of Social Services. It's critical when you want to file a complaint that you know which agency you're supposed to go to. The good news is you can find this stuff on CANHR's website. It's all laid out there in our sections on filing complaints against skilled nursing and against residential care. Continuing care retirement communities are kind of a little bit of an odd fish because it is a continuum of care. There's actually several authorities, licensing authorities that could be involved depending on the nature of the complaint. DSS for some parts and DPH for other parts, and so it's a little bit specific. I would call us at CANHR if you have a question about who's supposed to get it. Let's go to the next one. Okay, what goes in a good complaint? I'm not going to read every single thing here, partly because you'll find it under complaint, but I do want to flag a couple important things. Specificity. So remember, put yourself in the shoes of the person who's working for the state who gets your complaint, which should be in writing, remember? If they need to have enough specific information that they're able to figure out what kinds of questions they should be asking, who they should be going to, maybe what kinds of documents they should be looking for. And so if you have a few different complaints, like when you do your call bell, nobody comes. But there's another complaint, which is that the food is supposed to be, breakfast is supposed to be brought at 7. Sometimes it's brought at 5 a.m. Sometimes it's brought at 9 a.m. That means sometimes you don't get to eat your food. You got to put both because because if you only put one of them, and that's what the investigator sees at the state, they're only going to look at the one. That's the scope that they have in front of them to investigate. Make sure you include both. But this is my editorial advice to you. If you have a few different things you're complaining about, one is, I don't like the blinds in my room. They're not open wide enough to get in enough light. Another one is, I don't like my roommate. Person's a pain. I keep asking for a different roommate. They don't give me one. The third one is, I have stage 4 bed sores because they don't have enough staff to move us. Focus on the one that is most important. That doesn't mean you can't include other ones if you want to make sure they're investigated too, but it tends to dilute things if you have 12 different things you're complaining about and you really care most about 3. So editing yourself is a way of keeping it tight, making sure it gets the attention that it deserves. Focusing on harm is really important right now. We've just gone through a very frustrating period with the regulators, both DSS and DPH, where because of COVID, they were frankly kind of focusing just on COVID-related stuff, and it was very hard to get their attention. And while technically what they tell us is that's over, and they're looking at everything now, still focusing concisely on harm, on how a complaint harms you is important. And especially even still, I think if it can be kind of COVID related, it still doesn't hurt to make that point. For example, if they say that we're not letting you have visitors because we don't have enough staff. Oh, we'd like to be able to have more visitors, but there's just no one around. That's a staffing problem too, and a staffing problem in the middle of a pandemic is a huge deal. It means people aren't getting the care they deserve. And so, so make sure that you're thinking through what the harm is that results from the conduct that you're complaining about. It helps get the attention that you want from the investigator. People, your other residents can be witnesses. It doesn't have to be like staff people or your doctor. It could be your roommate is a good witness. Make sure that you put the name of that person in. And let's go to the next slide. Okay, how to send your complaint. So this is in a way the easiest part. I'm not going to dwell on it. You'll find lots of stuff on our site. For DPH, you can find our guide on the different ways that you can file your complaint. Basically, for the DPH, it's going to be through the district office for the DPH. For the DSS, it's going to be through the Centralized Complaint and Information Bureau. All that stuff's on our site. You'll find it there. Go look for it. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is a lot of stuff here, but I want to focus on just a couple of things. One is, people are often super afraid of what will happen if they file a complaint. What if they're retaliated against? What if you're a family member and your mom is at the facility and you don't even get to see her regularly and you don't know how they're going to treat her once they get a complaint? Make sure you understand that whether someone's at a assisted living or a nursing home, there are laws on the books which would punish facilities for retaliating. And in fact, if there's any discriminatory conduct within 180 days of filing a complaint, it's presumed to be retaliatory and can get a facility into a lot of trouble. Doesn't mean that they won't be mad sometimes, but at least feel like there's some protections that are built in. You'll also see that here it says you have the right to remain anonymous. True on the books, but unwise. Why? Because the investigator needs someone to talk to verify what you're complaining about. Now, you can ask to keep it confidential, which in some circumstances will provide some measure of protection when the investigator is talking to the facility. But anonymity is basically the kiss of death. Yes, you can ask for it, but it's going to be very hard to get your complaint listened to if you ask for it to be kept anonymous. Some other stuff here I'm not going to dwell on because we don't have much time. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so actually, I'm sorry. Can we go to the last slide because this is something important I don't want to blow over. If you file with the DPH they have an obligation to begin an investigation within 10 days of receipt of your complaint. But if your complaint is of imminent danger of health or seriously bodily harm, something that really goes to health and safety, they're supposed to be investigating within 24 hours of the receipt of the complaint. You have a right to a response. And so you have a right at the completion of the investigations to the DPH notifying you of it in writing of its findings. They often blow this off cold. Doesn't mean you shouldn't call them up. Call them up 2 days after you file your complaint and say, who's the investigator who's been assigned to this matter, and keep on them, because you do have the right to do that. Similarly, with DSS, CCL is supposed to inform the complainant of the plan of action once the complaint has been investigated. That's something you should be able to call DSS and follow up on also. I'm sorry, now let's go to the next slide. Okay, so what if you're still not happy? DPH investigates, they say, well, there's just nothing there, and you still have rights. You can request an informal conference. You have to do so within 30 days of the receipt of the findings that you got. Make sure you get the findings, so make sure you stay on them to get those findings. If you're still dissatisfied, you can still go up the chain with the deputy director. There's information here on how to do that. Similarly, on the DSS side, you can go to the district manager at CCL. You can go to the regional manager at CCL. There's a link here that is provided. You can also simply look on the filing a complaint against an assisted living facility, a piece on our website where you're going to find a lot more information on those appeals. Yes, you can go to your state legislators. And also, if it's an important story, think about the media, because press is, especially during this COVID pandemic, very interested in hearing about bad conduct, especially things that are related to COVID, related to infection control at these nursing homes. And you can get a good hearing in the press sometimes before you get a good hearing anywhere else. I think that's it for me. I'm open to any questions you guys might have.
There is a question and about, I'm sorry, now I can't find the chat. Where are the chats?
I'll let you find that, Pat. One question I remember that we got was the extent to which people can ask police to do wellness checks on people who are in facilities. It's totally understandable that you'd want that to happen, especially if there are visitation restrictions that keep you from doing that wellness check. The reality is it's very difficult right now to get the police into a facility to do something like a wellness check, absent some very serious evidence that someone's actually in harm or in danger. If you think someone's in danger, I would actually go to DSS. You can go to local authorities too. You can go to the county public health department as well, especially during this pandemic period, because their authority is in there also. Sorry, Pat, did you have another one?
Oh, no, that's okay. One of the problems is that there's a lot of complaints about DPH. The Department of Public Health has done an absolutely deplorable job in following up on complaints. What, there are 10,000, 14,000 complaints behind. And when they do, a lot of folks have already said they're supposed to provide you the option of requesting an informal conference. Once you request them, they ignore you, even if it's timely.
Yes, and I'll add to that, if that's not bad enough already. Sometimes they are so slow in following up that by the time they actually do the investigation, you know, the CNA who might have been involved has moved on 3 times. Maybe the resident has moved on 2 times, and they say, oops, well, no evidence to investigate here. We're moving on. We're closing this investigation. So we at CANHR have been working hard on this issue for years, and it is enormously frustrating. I will say that during the pandemic, there is at least a kind of spotlight right now, especially on COVID-related issues that didn't exist 6 months or a year ago. And if you also go to county DPH, or if you also go to media, you may sometimes get a little more attention than you might otherwise.
And one other thing I want to bring up, one of the problems that we've had with the CCRC branch in particular is their failure to respond to complaints on any kind of basis, much less a timely basis. And so for people to understand, Continuing care retirement communities have to be licensed as a residential care facility for the elderly in order to operate in the first place. So all the same rights that apply to residents of residential care facilities for the elderly, assisted living, apply to those people who are residents of continuing care retirement communities. So when people send their complaints to the CCRC branch, they're not always responded to. And I say that with tongue in cheek. They're seldom responded to. I would send them also to the Department of Social Services because these are residents' rights issues that apply to CCRC residents. That is something that we've needed to clean up for years, and that is the responsiveness of the CCRC branch. And it has not happened yet. Hopefully it will happen over the next couple of years. I see Margaret Griffin is on too. Hi, Margaret, from Kelcra. They have an organization that represents residents of CCRC. Margaret is the president of that organization. And it's very important for people to understand, gather together. Getting organized into family councils doesn't leave you out there as just the one person. When you're like this, you're going to be much stronger. So whether you organize as an organization like CalCRA or CANHR or a family council in your facility, I think that's probably the most powerful thing you can do is to organize a family council. But go ahead. Any other questions?
Yeah, Pat, can I add one thing more on like just basic self-advocacy? Just, it doesn't necessarily have to apply to long-term care, but one thing we always recommend, you start with writing, and everybody has a boss. If you're not getting satisfaction at one level, you take it to their boss. If you don't get satisfaction at that level, you take it to their boss. It's not going to work for every case, every situation, but a lot of times that's the process you're going to have to go through. Be patient and endure and keep going up and up the chain until you get the satisfaction you want. And if at any point you feel like the process isn't working for you, that's when you can reach out to CANHR and we can try to facilitate that.
Well, one thing that Lori Delgado brought up is the isolation is not a civil matter, but it's a criminal by a third party. Forced isolation, which would require law enforcement accountability, oversight is important. And I absolutely agree. It's just getting law enforcement to enforce the law. You can't get DPH to enforce the law, much less law enforcement. And time after time, when people have called law enforcement to get their rights enforced, law enforcement backs the facility, and that's one of the problems.
And a related problem is that right now during the pandemic, rules that we take for granted against things like unlawful isolation are kind of in limbo in many places because of the effects of public health directives, especially county directives on quarantining and isolation. So you have to take those into account too.
And then there's a question, where is advocacy happening on limiting the size of humans that live in SNFs? I know if you open a new SNF, private rooms and bathrooms are required. But is there any advocacy on changing these older buildings? And yes, there is. I mean, one of the things that the reimagining nursing homes for the future, in fact, I have an interview with AARP tomorrow about that very thing. We cannot think that it is a good way to take care of our elders by forcing people to live 2 or 3 to a rooms. We can't think that we're going to prevent people from getting COVID when they have to share rooms with 2 or 3 people. We've got to change the way that we provide long-term care in this country and certainly in this state. And the current way with this motel model, forcing people in as many as possible so that you can make a profit. And let's not forget, 80% of the nursing homes in California are for-profit. Many of them run by large for-profit corporations, and they're millionaires. And they've gotten millions and billions of dollars from the federal government. Oh yeah, somebody said 4 to a room. Sonoma County has 4 buildings that have 4 to a room. Now that's ludicrous to think you're going to be able to isolate people and keep them from getting infected. Anyway, I digress. Other questions? One of the things that we can say is, oh, I know, one of the questions was, why are local public health departments, they're required to follow state visitation mandates, but they are also allowed to override it with stricter regulations in many areas. Why?
And this is a frustrating feature of the law when it comes to matters of public health, and that is county public health departments have substantial authority, independent authority and discretion. And so what you will find is The California Department of Public Health will say, well, we have to defer to our partners at the counties, and the counties will say something different when that Cal DPH is saying, and they have to kind of work it out if at all. So in matters especially related to COVID, to transmissibility, to quarantine and isolation, counties still have a lot of authority, unfortunately.
Well, I will say this, that if you do file a complaint and you're not satisfied, which will happen 9 times out of 10, please let us know. And we will advocate on your behalf. Let the local ombudsman office know as well. We recommend that you CC your complaint to the department, to the ombudsman, and to CANHR. And we will follow up as well as we can. So I do believe that if you organize family councils, again, whether it's in a residential care facility, you have the right to organize a family council. You have a lot more power that way. And the family councils who have organized during this pandemic have been able to see some really good systemic changes in their facilities. So, and if you have questions about that, please let us know. Any other questions?
I had one more point I wanted to make, Pat. Mike brought up insufficient staffing as a source of complaint problem. And I wanted to mention that this has come up in a fair number of visitation restriction questions. The facility will say, we don't have enough staff to accommodate anything more than, a couple of visits a day. And so a lot of people go weeks without visits because of the scheduling problem. I think a good counter argument to that is that accommodating visitation is an absolute core function of long-term care facilities. And if they don't have the staff necessary to accommodate visitation, then they should not be admitting any new residents. So that's a point you may want to make in your complaints. Hey, if you got enough staff to take on new residents and new responsibilities there, then you better be accommodating visitation too. They can't be doing both. They can't deny visitation, or at least a reasonable amount of visitation, and still take new residents.
And that's exactly what they're doing.
Oh, yeah.
Well, it's now 7 minutes after 12. I want to thank all of you for joining us today. I want to thank Tony and Julie and Mike for your wonderful, and Emil for helping, and Pauline for helping. And all of you, thank you very much. And take a look at the chat. You'll see some really helpful links. If you missed anything and you want to, this recording will be posted. Is that right, Emil?
Yes,
And the slides as well?
correct. I will email everyone the recording and the slides.
So
when
you'll
it's
get the
ready.
recording, you'll get all the slides, you'll get all the links, and go out there and advocate. Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you all.
All right. Bye.